probably know that shift bushings are a subject near and dear to my heart. These bushings here were used for years and years and years on Mercedes-Benzes, and as they age, they break out and fall out and deteriorate. This is what the shift rod hooks into that goes from the shifter to the transmission lever. And when those bushings fail, your shift lever is going to be very sloppy and you're going to get rattling. And I've even seen cars that went out of park and rolled down the hill, and one in particular smashed into a tree. So it is a safety issue. And you know I have a special tool that will allow you to install these shift bushings. Many have reported, man, without that special tool, that would have been really tough. But I want to show you why you have to be careful not to always assume that it's a shift bushing. If you're getting a lot of play and a lot of slop, you need to check this out. You know, obviously you want to replace the bushings if they're old, even if they look kind of okay. You know, this one kind of looks okay, but it's pretty hard and I'm sure it's going to fail if I leave it in there. So just replace them. They're very inexpensive. But in this video, I'm going to show you something else you need to check when you're underneath the car replacing the shift bushings. Don't assume it's just the shift bushings. It may be something else. Now, this doesn't happen very often. I mean, I've only seen this 4 or 5 times in the last 20 years. So it's not that common, but you could replace the 2 shift bushings in your automatic transmission Mercedes and you'd end up going, wow, why is this shifter still loose? Let me show you this other problem now. If you look here, you can see the rod is tight in the bushing. The bushing looks good. So you might get into your car and say, well, you know, I don't need to replace that bushing. It looks like it's been recently replaced. I pull this clip off. Now I'm going to pull the rod off of the lever. And of course, this is a lever that's going right up into the center console where your shifter is. But what you want to do is you want to grab this anytime you're down here. Just grab a hold of this and shake it. Look at that. Look at the movement. See that? It's moving almost an inch. So that means one of the bushings up in that lever action is broken out. So this is something you want to keep an eye on right here. Now I'm going to explain what I'm going to have to do to fix this. You know, to get to that shifter assembly, it's pretty obvious you're going to have to remove this center console cover. In most cars, it's wood. You need to be really careful. I'm not going to go over the details on this because the different chassis require a different procedure, but just exercise caution. Don't try to pry the switches out. You're going to crack the wood. What you want to do is get this piece lifted up, whether it be a 116 or a 123, and once you get it lifted up, tip it back and unplug all the switches from the back side. Do not pry these out or you'll damage the wood. Of course, if you have a plastic one, it's not a big deal, but even then you can scratch it. Just leave these in place. In fact, anytime you're changing these switches, you don't want to pry them out. You want to remove this piece, tip it back, pull all the plugs, and then you push the switches out from the back side. So I'm going to set this aside. And this is actually 2 pieces. You have a lower piece which has the bushings and the lever going to the bottom. Then you have this upper piece which is the shift knob and the cover showing the transmission shift position. So the first step is to take a flat blade screwdriver here on the left side and pry out this little light. This is the indicator light. You're going to have to get that pulled back. There you can see the indicator light there. And we'll put that out of the way. And the cover's held on with 3 number 10 screws. So now you can see you can lift this cover up, but you can't pull it off because the knob's in the way. So you want to move this up into the park position, tip this up, and underneath there on the bottom of that shaft is a 15 millimeter locking nut. And it's hard to see. You've got that rubber boot that's in the way there. So I'm going to hold up on the rubber boot, get that wrench on the nut, and And then I'm going to break that nut loose, and then I can twist the shift knob right out of the lower assembly. There you have it. You can see the nut, you can see the boot. You just loosen that up, pull that off. Now there are 4 bolts which hold the actual shift assembly to this center tunnel. Now 2 of those bolts are really hard to get to because they're kind of at an angle. So I'm going to pull these out first. And there's a bracket there that's connected to the wiring. If you can just pull that bracket up out of the way. Maybe I can pull the console back far enough to get on there. Let's see if we can get to this front one. Okay, we'll pull those 2 long bolts out. And there it is. There's your shift lever assembly. Now I'm going to take this over on the bench and we'll take a look at why it failed. But look at that. Look at the slop in that. Here you can clearly see what happens to these. Look at this bushing. The bushing has slid back. It's actually broken. Look, it's broken out in chunks. So it's a classic example of deteriorated plastic and rubber from a very old car. Even though this car only has 167,000 miles on it for a 1979 car, that's low mileage. You can see what happens to aged plastic parts. So with that bushing gone, you can see how much slop you've got right there, and that's what's making all the play in the shifter. So like I said earlier, there's probably a way you can take this apart. There's a clip here, you can pull this out, pull this plastic off, machine yourself a new bushing. But I found, at least for now, it's easier just to get a good use part out of another Mercedes. The replacement shifter assembly is installed. Before I button it up, there's something I want to check. I've installed a new bushing. You know, the bushing kind of looked okay on that replacement unit. But as I've said before, that'll really fool you. Take a look at the bushing. As soon as I pushed on it, it just broke into a whole bunch of little pieces. So we have a new shift bushing on the end of the shift lever. And now I'm going to check position. This is real important. You want to make sure that when you pull it through all the gears, when it comes down and low, it's down and low and not hitting the stop. And then when you go up into park, you want to make sure it's all the way up into park and locked over. And then bring it right back into neutral. It should sit right there in the neutral position. The rod underneath is adjustable. So if this is not lining up properly, when you replace one of these or when you're working on your transmission, always check this and you can adjust the rod in or out to get this adjusted just properly. Now I'm going to reinstall the light. Anytime I'm working under these shift covers, I replace these bulbs if I don't know the history of them. Now's the time to do it because, you know, these bulbs burn out and you can't see what gear you're in. We do carry these bulbs on my website. They're kind of a unique bulb and they're sometimes kind of hard to find. So I'll go ahead and put this down and snap it into place. And I'm going to turn the headlights on just to make sure it's working. Okay, it's working. And the next thing will be to bring that wood into position here. Put this up in park. I'm going to tip this back and I'm going to start plugging these plugs in, starting with the emergency switch. Make sure the pins are lined up properly. Okay, that one's plugged in. Now I'm going to plug in the driver's side power window switch. want to hold up on the wood. You don't want to scratch this area. You don't want to chip the corners of the wood. I get a little rag or something to kind of set that on. Now I'm going to come over to the other side, do the speaker switch, and do this right power window switch. Then I can set this back in place and screw it down. Take a look at that. I'm pretty excited. Now I have a shifter that won't rattle and shake when I'm driving down the road, and I positively know which gear I'm in.